Hey reader, welcome back here to the channel. This is Centaur, and we are looking today at the top 10 Lend-Lease vehicles for Great Britain in Bolt Action 3rd Edition. So, previously we took a look at the Lend-Lease options that are available to the Soviet Union and kind of ranked them based both on how good the units actually are, but also how they fit in alongside Soviet vehicles that already exist, right? So there are some units, like say the Bren carrier, that's available through the Lend-Lease program to the Soviet Union. That is a good unit. Don't get me wrong. It's a perfectly fine transport. But when you already have a Consum Let's, the value add of the Bren is relatively minimal. In this case, we're looking at an even more interesting situation because the British also receive a large number of equipment. They receive it from the Americans, but then they also make some changes of their own to a number of those. So this actually created a little more of an interesting decision and paradigm that I wasn't, I'll be honest, I wasn't quite ready to handle when I first sat down with it. I realized I was constantly second guessing myself on what should count and what shouldn't count. And more on that when we go down below. But today we're going to be ranking what I think are 10 of the best options you can choose if you're looking to forego traditional British either devices of their own invention or innovations and instead go with something that came over from the United States. So first of all, looking at metrics and requirements, we're going to be ranking this with the 6 categories that we always do. We'll be looking at opportunity cost. You'll have a higher score depending on how low your points cost is. How good you are at removing infantry, how good you are at removing light armor, how good you are at removing serious armor, since those are not the same thing. And very often there are quite a few skew builds that will make it very difficult that for an army that is invested in autocannons or anti-tank rifles or smaller end anti-tank guns to actually handle them because of how penetration works and how pins work in 3rd edition. We'll also be looking at durability. So, the bulkier and the more durable that it is, the more points it will end up scoring. And then also looking at utility and abilities. So, gaining additional benefits for, having faster movement, but also better movement in the form of, special words or keywords that allow you to move better, as well as things like, command vehicle and stuff like that, although that doesn't really come up so much in this list. So to start off with the ones that were closed but not considered for the Lend-Lease program. That is to say, this was close but no cigar. This includes things like the Sherman VC Firefly. I like the Firefly. It's a fantastic option. We'll see how much it changes and adjusts with the new book for the British when it comes out. But in my examination, this was not a Lend-Lease vehicle. It was the original Sherman, but then the British took it and they innovated it. So from an honesty standpoint, I don't think we can really call this a vehicle that was produced in the United States, sent over, and then used as was by the British. And that's really what we're trying to assess here. Similarly, you have kangaroo transports, things like the Stewart kangaroo and others are really just hollowed out American tanks that were then turned into armored personnel carriers. As far as I can tell, it was never the intention of the Americans to turn their tanks into APCs. And so because of that, I'm going to give the nod to the British that this was actually a pretty brilliant design that especially the Canadians took advantage of when it came to moving men up. Because it simplified the supply line. It meant that they only had to supply certain types of material to the front, and it could work for everything from tanks to armored transports, which is really good. But it also just means that I'm going to consider these to be homegrown British things using borrowed material as opposed to something that was sent over from the Americans and then put directly into service. Similarly, the Americans did send over a number of international harvesters and other like tractors and such. As far as I can tell, they don't have a profile, at least as of yet, in the game. So we're just going to skip over that. We're not going to, consider the utility of a, just basically a common tractor, right? That's available in the game. And then finally, the M29 Weasel was sent over from the Americans. It's, it's really good. It's good, especially if you're working with like, sand and you need to be able to do amphibious landing sort of stuff. It has a lot of multi-purpose to it. But as far as I can tell, admittedly, we don't have the Armies of Great Britain book yet, so hopefully it'll appear there. It isn't yet available to the British, I don't think. Maybe I missed it, but I didn't find it. So toward that end, just so you know, like, it's great. Probably would have made the top 10. I just haven't seen it in the list yet. So toward that end, we aren't ranking the M29 Weasel. I reserve the right to come back to this video at some point in the future once we see the Armies of Great Britain book to see whether or not maybe we should add it to the list. Honorable mentions, things that did not quite make it to the top, include things like the M20 Scout Car and the M8 Greyhound. The biggest issue that these have, even though I really like the profile and the design of these, the British armored cars are some of the best armored cars in the game. Just being honest, like depending on what you want, you can get durable and punchy, you can get light and zippy and quick with a good weapon on it, you can get super cheap, you can get, durable, reliable, fully buttoned up, you can do all kinds of stuff. And the biggest drawback that both of these have is damage value 7 with recce and open topped is fine, but there are a lot of ways to get a better tool than that. And in many cases, they're just British vehicles are just either of the same value but better value, or they're just a straight up upgrade, right? You look at something like the M20 Scout Car and you compare that to the Staghound AA. The Staghound AA is sporting damage value 8 instead of damage value 7. Still admittedly open topped, but still has, not just the heavy machine gun on top, it has two heavy machine guns and an additional machine gun, medium machine gun. So, like it doesn't really matter. I'm not trying to say that they're bad because I do like these cars. I don't think that they're like ultra competitive, but I do like them. But I think it's really hard to choose them over the Humbers, the Staghounds, the Rolls Royces, the Lancasters, right? Like there's just a whole line of British armored cars that I think are going to perform better. Similarly, the Jeep is just it is a good tool and it was heavily used and it is very nice to have and they look really cool, but it is just not really an improvement over the really, really, really tiny transports that Britain already has, right? If you already have a three-man civilian car and the only difference is the Jeep can tow a light AT gun, like that's not a dramatic advantage. Not to mention, they're sitting on a whole lot of three-man, four-man, and five-man capacity transports that range from, light and quick and zippy like the Jeep to, more tracked but also armored options as well. So the Jeep just doesn't quite offer quite as much to really make it to the top 10. And then similarly, you have the Ducky, right? The amphibious truck that the Americans designed. The biggest issue here is that the British already have the Terrapin, which means that they already have an amphibious truck option. So there really isn't a need for the Ducky, so we're not going to include it. So starting off looking at number 10, we have the M3 Halftrack, which might come as a bit of a surprise considering that the M3 Halftrack was in the top half in the Soviet Union video. As we discussed earlier, like it is a really, really good platform. It has a 12-man capacity, which is a lot. You can do a lot with that. It is fully armored, which is a lot more useful in this edition. It is a potential multiple gun carrier. Like you can put an awful lot of machine guns on this thing, which is great. The problem is that when you already have kangaroo transports that can fit, 4 men, 11 men, the utility of a 12-man transport is kind of lost, especially when you are required to buy the heavy machine gun on it already. You can put machine guns on kangaroos, but they're optional, which means if you want to take them a little bit cheaper, you totally can, right? And you can rush up a unit, and if you need to, you can boogie out, or you can continue using it for cover afterwards. And so the result is, depending on what you need, the kangaroo fills this role quite well. Yes, they are admittedly fully tracked instead of half tracked. There are benefits to that, like double movement on roads. But if you're looking for double movement on roads on an armored chassis that still holds a large number of guys, we have other options that are coming further down the line. So because of that, the M3 half track, the M5 ham track, whichever half track you end up taking, like they're fine. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think they're quite as good for the British as they were for, say, the Soviets or the Americans. Number 9, we have the M4 Sherman 105 millimeter. This is a fully buttoned up damage value 9 medium howitzer. It still has the coaxial machine gun as well as a hole mounted machine gun. So it does have multiple weapon systems, which is really nice. The biggest benefit that you get here is that it is cheaper, admittedly also taller, but it is cheaper than a Cromwell CS, which has the exact same stat line effectively. It's just that the Sherman is easily catches fire. And as we mentioned in the easily catches fire video, that's actually really good. You should take it every single time that it's present. And it does really good here. So the primary issue with the M4 Sherman 105 millimeter is just the fact that while Howitzers in general actually just took a dip. Really, in this edition, they aren't nearly as good as they were last edition. The big thing is it is slightly cheaper than a comparable British vehicle if you were looking to take that vehicle. And kind of in the same vein, you have the M4 Sherman 76 millimeter, where this is a heavy AT gun with coaxial machine gun and a hole mounted machine gun on top of that. It is again damage value 9. Again, a bit taller than a Cromwell, though it is also a bit cheaper, right? The biggest thing here is there's two ways you can run the M4 Sherman, which is nice. The first one is basically 5 points cheaper than a normal Cruiser Tank 8 Cromwell because it's the exact same profile, but it has easily catches fire. Alternatively, you can pay an extra 15 points effectively over what you would have paid for a Cromwell, and you can get a heavy AT gun instead, which is the one that we showcase here within the stats. I think this one is more useful because if I'm going to be spending 210 points on a regular Cromwell, I might as well just kick it up to 225 and take a heavy AT gun instead of a medium AT gun. Yes, the profile is larger. It is taller to take the Sherman, but at the same time, like, I mean, I don't think it's going to make a dramatic difference when it comes to terrain. You'll probably still get cover most of the time. And perhaps most importantly, you're going to punch an awful lot harder with a higher penetration at an even longer range because of the fact that your standard range, your long range is a little bit further out, right? You're more likely to be within standard range rather than long range. So the Sherman, again, it is good. And in particular, the nice thing is in the British list, heavy anti-tank guns are actually quite rare. They tend to make a jump from about the medium AT gun route straight to the super heavy. There really aren't a lot of heavy AT guns out there. And so if you want a relatively budget but still effective way of trying to remove serious armor, then the M4 Sherman with a 76 millimeter is one of the best ways to do it. Number 7, we have the LVT4 Water Buffalo. This can range in cost depending on how much you want to deck this thing out with. Starting at 94 points regular, I mean, you can take this thing with, the double machine guns that you see there. It has a transport capacity of 24. It is admittedly damage value 7 and open top, so it's relatively light and fragile. But at the same time, like, it is still armored. And if you put a company commander in this, especially with the new rules that are coming out where he's got a +5 to morale, you're not even really worried about pins, honestly, when it comes to activating. You can still run this thing around and it will provide, because of its nice long and relatively wide body, quite a bit of cover for the rest of your men. It will protect the guys that are inside of it. Company commander will make sure that they can at least jump out and attack on a given turn. Maybe they rally afterwards, depending on how much of beating you're taking. But the nice thing is you can really turn this thing into a gun platform if you really want to. You can take a forward-facing machine gun on this for 10 points. You can slap on a 35-point Polston light anti-aircraft gun. And those are the ones that we factored into the stats that are below. But if you really wanted to, and this would cost them points, it would push them into the realm where they're paying more and they'd lose points on the scale without a lot of extra benefit. You can upgrade the pintle-mounted machine guns to heavy machine guns if you want to. In which case, you're now sending out 3 shots of medium machine gun out the front and 3 heavy weapons that can pin armored vehicles, which is really nice. You can shred infantry with this thing. All 4 of these weapon systems are designed to do really well against infantry. You can pin down lighter armor and regular, more serious armor. This is actually not a horrible option for a lot of stuff. But most importantly, and this is huge, not only is it an amphibious vehicle, so you can maneuver it through more terrain, because of the fact that it's a transport and it's not an armored vehicle, you can take this just as part of a rifle platoon, as part of a heavy weapons platoon, engineering platoon. You can take this with other units that you're already planning on taking without having to invest in an armor platoon if you really don't want to. And in an army that has access to some decent anti-tank options, we'll talk about that more tomorrow, the result is it is kind of nice to be able to have a Matilda cost shredder, effectively, right? That's on par with machine gun tanks from other factions, except that these are heavy weapons instead of light weapons, small arms, right? So on the whole, I think a really good thing. The biggest issue here is that, again, if you're looking for a transport, 24 is typically overkill. Like, you're putting an awful lot of people in one place, and you may not all want them to go to the same objective. You may not want them all to be in a transport until they're ready to be dropped off, because you might have them slotted for supporting fire. So the 24, you are overpaying for what you really need, and we do have some better options for, still pretty good weapon attack platforms that are also carriers available to you coming later in the list. At number 6, actually holding where it was on the Soviet list, we have the N10 Wolverine. Again, really rare for British vehicles to have a heavy anti-tank gun. Really nice to have it on a, turreted chassis that in this case is damage value 8. So, it's not quite as durable as the Sherman. It's also open topped, so it's easier to pin than the Sherman. That being said, this is just a straight up upgrade on the other, tank destroyers effectively that the British have access to. It is very effective. It is very powerful. If you are thinking you're going to primarily be running into tankettes, light armor, armored cars, various kinds, this is a really, really good and relatively cost effective option. And you're going to be getting it at a dramatic discount over what a British tank of a similar caliber firepower would be providing you with. At number 5, we have the M5 Stewart. I think this is going to be a gem of third edition, kind of a hidden gem. I don't think a lot of people are going to start by running it, but I think we're going to see it a little more often. And it sports, kind of a typical light tank sort of build, right? It's a light AT gun, coaxial machine gun, forward machine gun, damage value 8. But in this case, when you remove vulnerable and you add that frontal armor, it's sitting at 155 points regular, at least as of the current Great Britain, rule book army. So, we'll see if this ends up changing, while still being extremely durable, right? I mean, it's taking fire from the front just like a Sherman. So depending on how you position this thing and where your enemy's threats are, whether or not they're outflanking a heavy weapon or not, I mean, you're getting effectively the defensive value of a Sherman for an awful lot cheaper, which is really nice. It also means that, infantry and regular armor, you can easily pin them out and pin them down. You won't have a whole lot of problem with that. It's effectively, I mean, a Matilda tank at 155 points regular, they cost the same amount, except that it's a Matilda that is on a smaller frame, so it's easier to hide and easier to put in cover. It has an extra machine gun, so you do get extra firepower, and what you're trading is weaker side or rear armor. So as long as you're okay with keeping your flanks protected on this thing, you're getting something equivalent to what the British have, but better. In number 4, we have the M3 White Scout Car, also where it was in the Soviet Union list. I think that this is one of the best transports in 3rd edition currently. You get a forward-facing heavy machine gun, not a problem because you're probably pushing it toward the enemy anyway. You have the option for side guns, similar to what the M3 Halftrack gets, and to some extent similar to what the Polston, what the LVT4 Buffalo gets, except that, these ones have to face out of specific directions. Those ones are all 360. It has a damage value 7. It's on a wheeled chassis. It is open topped because, as you notice, there's no top to it. But it has a transport 8, which means you can transport the kinds of units that you'll actually want. And you put a platoon commander in here, super cheap, with his +3 morale. You drop a 7-man squad in with him, or, maybe a couple of Piats or, a couple of flamethrowers in with him. And you have a very durable, very cheap, very easy to use attack vehicle, which is really nice. And again, the kinds of units that you would want dropped off at one specific place, as opposed to really having so much transport capacity that you need to be dropping people off at multiple places. This, I think, is the better way to do it, especially since you can buy 2 of these M3 White Scout cars with double the order dice, more chance that you're able to keep it alive longer because there's more of them on the table and they have to do more damage to them. And you can send them to multiple objectives at once over and against what you would have gotten with the LVT4. At number 3, we have the M3 Grant. This will range somewhere between 230 and 250 points. You have a turreted light AT gun. You have a medium AT gun in the hull. You also have a medium machine gun up on the top, which I just always believe in purchasing. Technically, you don't have to purchase it, but I really do think it's a worthwhile goal. It's sitting on damage value 9, which easily catches fire, which is really nice. It starts with vulnerable. You can remove vulnerable if you want to, which is great. I think that might work out better, and that's what brings you to that 250 point cost. The fact that you get 2 heavy weapons means that it's a good tank destroyer. It's especially good at hunting light armor. It is a reasonable pin generator against serious armor. It's a good bruiser at damage value 9. It can take a beating, but it's also very bulky. It's very big, which on the one hand is typically a downside, but it also means if you need to use it for cover for your infantry as they're moving up, you can do that quite effectively with these guys because it's very big and it's very bulky. I mean, infantry can stand to the side of it and you can't even see them. Because of the fact that they're being fully blocked by the tank chassis. So it's not even just, it gives you heavy cover. You could make it so that you're getting full cover. There's absolutely no way to actually target the infantry on the other side, which when you have to work with things like Piats and flamethrower teams, maybe small squads of commandos or airborne or something else like that, this is a really, really good way to do it. It is relatively expensive, though, if you're looking for a tank dueler and a tank destroyer, though. And that's part of the reason why it is a good option. It's top three, but it didn't quite make it into the top two. At number two, we have the M3 Stewart. This is still a really, really good infantry shredding device. The turreted light AT gun, coaxial machine gun, the two hull mounted machine guns, which is how they end up handling that whole thing, is really good, honestly. It's a good attack profile. Damage value and vulnerable is tricky. It is on a small frame. It does have access to recce, so you can make it a little more reliable. In the all around, this is probably the best tank on the list, right? It can do the most to most things. There are skew builds like veteran, larger tanks that are going to do way better against this than they are going to do against those big tanks. The biggest reason though why it ranks this high is that beyond the LVT4, there really isn't a comparable British vehicle to this piece. The closest you kind of get is the Staghound AA with tons of heavy machine guns and a medium machine gun. But, the combination of large volumes of fire, good against infantry, but also has a light AT gun for trying to handle armor, now that is an awful lot more rare. And the closest you really get to it is the LVT4 Water Buffalo. And so on the whole, I think, the smaller frame, making it a little easier for you to hide, relatively good offensive firepower, options and plans for you when you're building out your tactical plan on how to keep it alive can kind of cover over some of that lower resiliency. But on the whole, I think it does really well. And number one on this list, and I had a pretty good idea walking into it that it was probably going to rate the best, is the M24 Chaffy. Now, the M24 Chaffy is one of those tanks that is a light tank with a medium anti-tank gun, which means it's punching above its weight. And that means that from a firepower perspective, it is a super cheap way to be able to get firepower at the level that you're looking at. And to give you an idea of what I mean by cheaper, I mean that this is, 160, 170 points regular, depending on how you want to purchase it. It's 160 points currently in the British book. It's 170 in the new Armies of US book because it gained the fast special rule. And so I anticipate 170 is more likely what it's going to be when the British book drops. But even at 170 points, that's 40 points cheaper than a Cromwell. And the only difference is a damage value 8 versus a damage value 9, which against smaller heavy weapons is really not going to make much of a difference. They're still not likely to actually give you serious damage and force you to roll on the real damage chart. They're much more likely to just glance you, if not fail to damage entirely. And against really big guns like a medium or heavy anti-tank gun, to be completely honest, it probably wasn't going to make much of a difference. 16% more likely to get destroyed. It's not actually dramatically more resilient to go that step of DV9 over DV8. So because of that, you get relatively durable, but also very, very cheap and affordable firepower. And with the recce rule, you can boogie out of there if you really need to, which is really nice. And with the fast rule, you get the benefit of, hey, we can move with this thing, right? It can cruise in ways that other tanks can't, which both means getting to cover is an awful lot easier. It means getting to objectives is an awful lot easier, and whipping around and then getting to those side arcs so that you can turn that medium anti-tank gun effectively into a much cheaper heavy anti-tank gun. I mean, that is spicy. And so, in my opinion, if you're looking at passing up on traditional British armor and you want to grab something that came over from the Americans, I would take a look at the M24 Chaffy. Now, obviously, it depends on your army build, right? If you're planning on going primarily infantry, you're running a ton of Piats or flamethrowers or something else like that, you may not need a really punchy big anti-tank gun if you don't want to. And that's fair. That's fine. At the same time, it could be that, hey, if what you're looking for is just something that will make that play better, you might want to take a well-gunned transport or maybe an M3 Stewart in order to help you against enemy infantry. If you know that you've got a lot of anti-infantry tools in the list, you're running lots of light machine guns, you're running lots of easily ranging in sort of stuff to keep people from camping with indirect fire, you may want a brawler or a bruiser, at which point something like the M3 Grant or something even like the M24 Chaffy might do a better job for you, just for helping to deal with some of those bigger threats. There's a lot of options that the British get, and thus one of the reasons why they ranked so well in our overall ranking scheme from second edition. But in general, when it comes to the Lend-Lease program, it is quite nice that what's being provided by the Americans does kind of help to supplement needs and say, hey, if you were thinking about this, you can also, with some trade-offs, go with this instead. And I think that that's pretty awesome. But what do you think? Was there anything that I slept on, anything in particular that I should have included that I did not? Let me know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.